Good morning to everyone who's here live with us today, and for those of you joining us on YouTube, then good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to this. Now today we are on the second of 9 teachings on the third Gyalwa Karmapa's Buddha nature text called Pointing Out the Essence of the Tathagatas. But although it's the second, the first one was a general background introduction to what we call the 3 turnings of the Wheel of Dharma. And so, just a second. Today is really the first day on the Karmapa's text. So, as always, when we start our studies, we spend this very, very precious, very needed moment of focus on our motivation, being here for the very, very, very best of reasons. And that's, of course, because we have loving care for each and every sentient being. And we're trying to learn about Buddha nature and these classical teachings on Buddha nature so that our own mind is more mature, more at peace with things, so that in the long term we can become the very best of friends and, as time goes by, guides for other beings. As we'll see, or as we've seen so many times in our courses, the biggest suffering and the root of all suffering is the fact that we ignore the beautiful, wonderful, peaceful, wise, loving, compassionate nature of this very own mind, this mind that I'm using to talk to you, your mind that you're there using to listen to me, has at its core something timeless, precious, perfect, divine, sacred. That's true for all of us and all living beings. And to not be aware of that, to not be connected to that, is the greatest suffering that ever was. And it's the cause of all the relative sufferings of the 6th realm of existence. So we should feel very, very fortunate to be learning more about this true nature of everyone and everything, and be very aware of those sufferings, and try our very, very best to listen with an open heart and keen ears, beautiful intelligence, and all those things. To start, we'll do the refuge prayer, the 4 immeasurables, and maybe a lineage blessing prayer, the short prayer to Vajradhara. Sonje chodon soje chonom la jancho padon dane chapsanche. Dagi jinso jipe sonom je, drola penchera sonje drupara sho. Samchen tamche dewa dang dewe judang dem para juche. Dongal dang dongal ji judang shalwaran juche. Dongal mepe dewa dampa dang men shalwaran juche. Yerin chadan ne tang shalwe tanyom chenpola ne paran juche. Doje chanchen talo narodang mapa mela choche kambopa. Dusum shecha kunchen kamapa cheshi chungje jupa senandang. Rita sasum padan drupaso sablom chaja chela nyamipe. Nyame drogon dapo kajula so wandev so kajula manam. Jupa zeno nam trajinjelo. Shenlo gongji kampra sumpa shin zeno kunna choshen mepatam. Sede data chove gongchen na nyeko shimpa me parajinjelo. Mogu gongchi kura sumpa shin menga tego jepe lamama. Jendo sowan depe gongchen na chome mogu jeware jinjelo. Yengme gongchi no she sumpa shin. Kansha topi ngo samade. Macha de karjopi gomchen na gomcha lodan tralware jinjilo. Nanzo ngo chukra sumbashin. Chiang mayen chiang chawana. Manga ropa chawe gomchen la. Kote yerme tok pare jinjilo. Deyata shame shamawati shameta shatra. Om kore mare jite karota ke yore tejuoti. Boloyani vishudane male malapana ye. Kukure kaka grase grasana homuki paramuki amuki. Shamme davane sawagraha bandhanane nigritva. Sava bhava pravadina vimukta marapasha savitva buddha mudra. Anudgatita sava mare putsarita parishuddhe bigashantu sava marakama. Golden sawe lama rinpoche, dagye chewara pende ten shoda. Kadren chenpo gone jesonte, kuson tuche ngadrop santu sa. So, thank you very much. In one way, I'd quite like to go back to these three turnings of the Wheel of Dharma for context, for the text that we're going to study. But in another way, this context is endless. It's endless. About the three turnings. Were there three turnings? Were there two turnings? Was there just one turning? And then what emerged from that, the Buddha nature teachings, and then in Tibet, Rantong, Shentong schools, and so on. Some of the finest minds of Tibet have spent a lot of time and a lot of writing about all of that. They don't all quite see it from the same point of view. And then already in the West, there are doctrinal theses written on it, and it can become endlessly complicated. So it's better if we don't go there, and that I give you a traditional explanation of this text. So let's just say, to sum up those three turnings of the Wheel of Dharma, is that what's happening is Buddha is showing what is. But he's only showing what is once people's minds are clear from the baggage they carry. Baggage in terms of assumptions, projections. Even just as I said this last sentence, baggage. What did that mean to you? Assumptions, projections. Every word that I say resonates differently, a little bit with each one of you. We all have our life baggage. And so it was very important that Buddha introduced, let's say, pointed to the truth of everything and of everyone. He pointed that to people who had already dramatically, exhaustively worked with their personal conceptual baggage. so that they weren't immediately misinterpreting. If we look generally at that baggage, then the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma gets rid of the baggage of a very solid feeling of I as a person, I as a lasting entity. So in the first turning, Buddha shows that there is no lasting I, there is no lasting ego. But of course, and as I've said many times, please think about it, because so many Buddhists get it wrong. When he says I does not exist, he means it doesn't exist in a lasting or eternal or cosmic way. Personal I doesn't exist. But he doesn't deny the existence, otherwise he would never have taught. Who would he have taught if he didn't think anybody existed? People who talk to people who aren't there, we generally put them into special care. Buddha taught people. He taught them they have no lasting self, but then he taught them that who they are was the product of hundreds, thousands of lifetimes of causes and conditions, interdependence, karma. So this idea of a lasting me, which we all feel and which we all plug into. I'd like to give you just an example of the necessity of this. I met quite a few people in my life come to the Rinpoches, they come to Dharma, because they have a very low sense of self-worth. They think they're useless, they think they're rubbish. And sometimes it's because they've had a very sad childhood or whatever, where one of their parents or both have treated them like rubbish or so on. Now, no matter what happens in life, no matter what wonderful Dharma teachings one gets, if you know somebody like that, or if you've got that in yourself, you'll know how deeply entrenched it is, this feeling of who I am, how I am, this feeling of a me. So it's a deeply entrenched illusion, basically. So powerful. And the fact that it's illusion doesn't mean it's not powerful. It can create damage for you, damage for other people, but it's illusion. And it can change, and it can change to something completely different. So all of those fixed notions of me, in an India where there was a caste system, for instance, so some people felt so unworthy, other people felt very, very proud because they're at the top of the pile, and so on. That had to go. Because Buddha was going in the third turning to show the real, what we are. And you can't teach that if people are bringing all of a persona baggage to what they're hearing. Then in the second turning, he had to get rid of a very different sort of baggage, which is the baggage of our thinking mind, our conditioned mind. When we look in more detail, the five aggregates, the play of consciousness, thoughts, recognition, labeling, ideas, that we're using today for me to communicate with you. And this is the strange thing. Buddha had to show that what he is introducing people to is beyond all of that. It cannot be thought. Even the best thought of the best thinkers in the whole world and the best thinkers combined will never think the truth, this truth he's presenting. And of course, if you can't think it, then there are no words that can express it. And I remember once starting a month of teaching, well, I was interpreting, not teaching at that time, the text on Buddha nature, the main one, and the Lama said, well, gave one of the first verses. He says, "This is inexpressible." Then he just looked and he said, "So what are we going to do? We've got a month. We've got a month. And he said, how can I in all honesty talk about what cannot be talked about? So that you think about what cannot be thought about. So the written teachings are there. They're very, very useful. And they're there. Why? They're there mainly to get rid of erroneous thinking that can lead us astray, where people get caught up in the words. It's this whole thing, we'll come to it later in this text, of the finger pointing at the moon. You'll probably all come across this. It's in all the Buddhist traditions. It's very famous in Zen. The teacher's pointing to the moon and saying, it's that. And everyone's looking at the finger and thinking, he means it's that. That's the moon. And people think, oh, that's the moon. They don't see that words and ideas and practice and what all the work we do is taking us in a direction. And sometimes you can get completely lost in the words. So the baggage of a feeling of me, an identity, a person, a persona, had to go because we're showing a universal identity that we all share. And then the baggage of relating to everything from within this castle we live in of conceptual structures. Our conceptual structures, they're like stained glass windows we look through. The colors, the shapes are all influencing what's on the other side. They had to go. And then the Buddha could do what? Well, actually sit with the people so that they shared the experience of enlightened mind. The sutras that emerge from that are a sort of a summary in words of what it's about. So let's leave that there. We could spend a lot of time on the three turnings, but I think it's good to have that overview of negation of ego illusions, negation of taking our concepts for realities, negation, and then affirmation in the third turning. This is Buddha nature. So those who are stuck in the second turning, which is all about shunyata, avoidance, emptiness, stuck there, very suspicious of those who follow the third turning, which affirms something. They spend a lot of time, some people, on Nagarjuna, Longchenpa, all these things, taking apart concepts, and end up all the time with nothing. And then they're saying that there's something. So this sacred something we must know about. So then the teachings on the third turning about what we call Buddha nature these days are said to be, the main ones are Mahayana Uttara, Tantra Shastra, are said to be a bridge between Sutra and Tantra. Sutra is what can be taught with words, meaning ideas that can be shared and learned. Anything that can be written down, spoken, belongs, and that's the Buddha's teaching, belongs to Sutra. Tantra, the word Tantra itself means thread in Sanskrit. And it means, it's like, I don't have one to hand, a mala, beads. You've got all the beads, you've got the mala that goes through, runs through all of them. If each bead was a life, this life, past life, life before that, this one same thread that's always been there is our true nature, hidden by our delusions. So Tantra means what actually awakens our mind to this unbroken, changeless, indestructible thread of being, true being, which is within us. Tantra is practice that awakens the mind to what is. Of course, there are many methods, all sorts of images, mantras, all of the stuff, but all of that is part of a path. But the point of Tantra is not blah, 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 blah ideas. It is practice. Visualize, meditate, sit quietly, practice all the stages so that your mind gradually moves from its chaos and its misassumptions into a stillness and an awakenedness so that the truth of your very own mind can be experienced. So Tantra has to be practice. Sutra, teachings, Tantra, that kind of level of practice. So the Buddha nature teachings are the bridge between Sutra and Tantra. They tell us that we have this inner purity, this inner Buddha, and that Buddha can manifest in all sorts of ways. That's why it's the bridge, because then Buddha can manifest in peaceful, wrathful ways, and those manifestations give us our practices, our links that enable us to tune in, to experience Buddha mind in its peaceful, in its wrathful forms, and so on, in its details. So the Buddha nature teachings, especially those of the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra, are the one huge reference that all the Tibetan schools and the Japanese tantric schools and so on use, Mahayana schools use. That text was summed up by the IIIrd Gyalwa Karmapa. So I sent out to those of you who registered for the course, I sent out a biography of the IIIrd Karmapa, because normally when we study this text traditionally, the first thing is to point to the qualities of the author. It's quite harsh. You don't want to read rubbish authors, just don't bother. And then it says, there are okay, good, better, best authors. So if you can, just go to the best. And if there are the others, then benefit because they've got something worth sharing. But please appreciate that if this one wrote it, if it's Buddha, that's the best, of course. And then if it's Buddha, if it's 10th level bodhisattvas writing authentic, then that is same as Buddha in quality. In the teachings on the 10 levels, it says, in terms of teaching other people, what a 10th level bodhisattva can do is the same as a Buddha, no difference. So our great bodhisattvas, Chenrezig and Manjushri, 10th level Maitreya, bodhisattvas, what they can do for us is not less than what the Buddha can do for us. The difference is in their own inner realization. But anyway, it's in terms of, it's too long to go into, but in terms of what they can give to us. And then we sort of come down from 10th level bodhisattvas to those who have stable recognition of shunyata and voidness, and then from there to those who are very, very learned. And then below that, just somebody who can write, who's had ideas. Yeah. If we don't have time, it's better if you can go to the very, very best. So with the IIIrd Karmapa, we have the emanation of a 10th level bodhisattva, and amongst all the Karmapas, one of the very greatest. So you'll see some of the details in his life. It's from here, this history of the 16 Karmapas of Tibet. Kamatinne was a Lama I knew for a short while, a few months, and he was very good at telling me off and telling me about my mind poisons, and in a very, very nice way, but very honest. So anyway, his work on the 16 Karmapas, it's brief for each one, but it's very reliable. So in there, we see that the third Karmapa, well, first of all, some lamas say, he's the first real tulku of Tibet. You might think that the second Karmapa ought to be the first tulku because he's the reincarnation of the first, but then it wasn't unknown for lamas to be recognized as a reincarnation of somebody else. That happened. But when somebody comes back and carries on the same work with the same people, the same monasteries and so on, again and again, life after life, the Karmapa was the first one to do that. So you can really only say when it's the third one who's reinstated actually to take over the work of the first two. That some people say he's really the first tulku, the first reincarnate Lama of Tibet. And then after him, it kind of caught on and ended up with tulkus everywhere, which is another story. It went a bit wrong. But anyway, he was the first. We see in his life not only tremendous spiritual attainment, but he had a huge influence politically. At the time, the great power in Asia was with Mongolia, China. They weren't the same as Mongolia and China these days. Sometimes there were Mongol emperors already, or at the time of Kublai Khan, Monga Khan, and so on. The second Karmapa already had powerful interactions with that Khan lineage. That's another story. And so the third Karmapa became the guru to the emperor. I mean, it's what we call the emperor of China, that whole area, but the Mongol dynasties had power over what we now call sort of China in history. Countries grow and shrink in history. So it's a very wonderful story. You see how the Karmapa knew that the previous emperor was going to die, so he didn't go to see him. And there's the new emperor which he went to enthrone. So it's like we've got this year King Charles being enthroned by the Archbishop of Canterbury. So the Archbishop's a big deal because they're the one who can say you're king, put the crown on your head. So the emperor was enthroned by the third Karmapa, and the emperor wanted him to stay because he's an amazing teacher. But the third Karmapa had been throughout his life not just a brilliant scholar, but somebody who had absorbed into our Kagyu lineage other significant lineages, and that's why I sent you a chart where you can see how it integrated many things. So he had his work to do, but also very interesting. He could see that there was a life obstacle to the emperor, and he had back in Tibet now. That's a long way away. It's halfway over a continent in times of travel by horse and by foot. So, but he knew he had in Supu an elixir of long life, very, very special, unique one. And he said, I need to go and get that for you. You can't just pop on an aeroplane and go and get it. It means a couple of years going there, coming back. But he did that, and so I think we can attribute to that the fact that that was the longest living Chinese emperor ever. So he took back the elixir, and he actually passed away in China. But the main thing about his life, from our point of view, isn't the politics. It's just curious how over all the generations the Karmapas have been a great influence on nations, and very often bringing peace between nations. So the third Karmapa was that, but very importantly, he was not just an heir to Mapa and Milarepa's teachings on Mahamudra and the six yogas, but he also became a complete heir of the Dzogchen teachings, and a master of Dzogchen in his own right, and somebody who received Tenma teachings and so on. So he made this fusion of Kagyu and Nyingma, of Mahamudra and Dzogchen. He also became the heir and introduced into our Kagyu lineage the Chu teachings. Actually, it's a larger tradition that is called Shiche, of which Chu is one part from Padampa Sonje. And he studied deeply in all of the schools so that he could understand very well. In particular, he became a great master of medicine and astrology, and he wrote a text, an amazing text that we use in the retreats, which shows how we as human beings are a microcosm of everything, and how each part of our energetic body resonates and is connected to the world around us through the power of the elements. So he was a huge master in so many domains. He had some illustrious students. Longchenpa was one of his students. And so he is a very, very worthy author of this text. Where do we find this text? Well, that one I just mentioned is called Samonanden in Tibetan, the Profound Inner Principles, about the microcosm and the macrocosm, and about how consciousness comes into human manifestation, and how the human develops in terms of inner energy channels and so on. Human experience evolves, goes through life, and what happens at death and so on. That major text is usually these days printed with two accompanying texts, so you get a bundle of three texts. There's the one about microcosm, macrocosm, and the channels, and the channels, chakras, inner energies, and so on. And then this text on Buddha nature, which is vital to know as the fundamental nature of our mind. And there's another text which is about distinguishing consciousness from primordial wisdom. So at the very beginning of my Zoom talks a couple of years ago, we did the distinguishing wisdom, primordial wisdom from consciousness. And now this is the Buddha nature text. So for the text itself, then for a traditional explanation, then we start with the title. And titles are a big deal in Tibetan. And Taisitaba often used to light up when he talked about titles. And he said, when it's that kind of top of the top range of author like the Buddha or a 10th level bodhisattva who composes a text, the title tells you everything. So if you're a really good scholar and you read that title, then all right, I know what this one's about. So they usually spend time explaining the title. This was written in Tibetan, and it's explained usually syllable by syllable, word by word. In Tibetan, it loses a lot with translation. But it is in Tibetan, it's Deshin Shekpi Nimpo Tempa Shesawi. Tenchu. So first of all, and Tibetan is almost back to front to English, we go to the last words, Tenchu. This is a Shastra. If we had lots of time, then, and like we do when we receive teachings on this, then the teacher says, well, there are sutras and there are Shastras. Sutras come from the Buddha. That's it. It's the Buddha's teaching. And so authentic Buddha's teaching. Buddha said it. Now, if you know about the Buddha's life, then Buddha traveled. Most of his teachings were in response to requests to teach or questions about this or about that. He didn't travel around with a program, like knowing I'm going to teach for 45 years. So years 1, 2, and 3, I'll teach this, and then I'll go on to that. It was very spontaneous. People asked questions, or people said, can you tell us more about this? And after the Buddha's passing in the first council and so on, then people who had memorized these teachings, because they weren't written down at the time, there was no writing used, they got together in the first council and they established what the Buddha had said in various places, in various circumstances. They're sutras. They're very, very precious because it's Buddha's own teachings. But then, when you look at it, especially if you've worked, as I have, with Rinpoches who are teachers, you see how much what they teach depends on who's in front of them to be taught. There's no point teaching advanced stuff to beginners or beginners stuff to advanced people, and then these people are ready for some things. Others not so much. It's not a question of advanced or beginner, just different psychologies. So Buddha responded in different places. Sutras. Shastras were written by Buddhists, Buddhist masters, after the Buddha, and they pulled together the Buddha's teachings on this topic. So here he taught this about karma, there he taught that about karma, and if we pull all this together, then we start to see more generally, what did the Buddha teach about whatever it was, karma, right conduct, and so on. And so the Shastras are not commentaries. They are not commenting on what the Buddha said. They are more, the main task is to gather together disparate information and to organize it so that we can have a better view of the Buddha's teachings. And then as time went by, they also added their own commentary. But the main point of the Shastra is that it gathers teachings from various places. There's more than that. There's a whole list of different types of Shastra, but that's one of the main ones. So in the commentary to this text, then by Jungle Control, then we see that the Karmapa in this Shastra, which is already commenting on Asanga's work, the Buddha Nature Teaching main text, is pulling together information and from, depends which list you go to, but about 15 or 18 sutras, Buddha's own teaching. So what's said in those, sometimes at length, sometimes just a few words, is gathered together to give us this overview of the Buddha's teachings. And I think I mentioned last week that the Buddha Nature teachings rested on, I gave the history of how that happened. So this is a Shastra, that's in the title. This is a Shastra, and on Tata Gata Garbha is what we'd say in Sanskrit, Deshin Shekpe Ningpo. So Tathagata, we say, to make it easy, translator like myself says Buddha. Or I can put Tathagata, which is another Sanskrit word, but not so many people know that. I mean, Buddha is a Sanskrit word, it's not English. If we put it into English, we would say the fully awakened and fully developed one. Bud means fully awakened, fully developed. Awakened from the sleep of ignorance, and in which all of the various 64 and other qualities are fully developed. Buddha. So to make it easy, when we see Tathagata, Deshin Shekpa in Tibetan, we say Buddha. But the word itself is Tathagata. Tata is the Sanskrit word for that. We get our modern English word that from the Indo-European word tata, that. And gata literally means gone to that. But you know, languages express things differently. In English, a proper meaning translation would be become that. You could say it, become it. Now, the reason the Sanskrit uses that and it is because they're wonderfully vague words. Talking about something which is beyond concepts. You see, if you say black, it means it's not white, red, blue, green, yellow. If you say round, it means it's not square, triangular, cubic, rhomboidal, anything like that. Most language that defines excludes by its very nature. It is wonderful. That. When you know it's beyond words, then the vaguest of words. And they are used. These are in the sutras. These are the words that are used to help us remember. You can just say that, which is so sacred and beyond our thoughts and beyond our experience. That. And so Tathagata means became that. In Tibetan, the Tata becomes Devshin. Devshin means it's got more resonance than in the Sanskrit. It means that as it really is, that as it is. Then Gata is the same, became. So it's a word for the Buddha who is one who became what we're going to study in these 8 sessions, the it, the that is the truth of everything. So Buddha became that. But this Shastra, there's one more word in the title. It's the Shastra about the Garbha in Sanskrit, Nyingpo in Tibetan, of the one who became that. So this word Garbha, it means, you can translate it as heart. The heart of the Buddha. It means the essence. Now, this word essence means something that holds all of its own qualities. Now, what is this essential it, that, business, whatever, that makes all that a Buddha is happen? You know, it's like you have a phone or a computer you're looking at now. You can do so many things. What is it essentially? You know, it boils down. You've got a chip and a memory and a few things, power. Then it can do all sorts of things. It's like getting to the very essence of it. So the heart, the essence, the feel of it in English could give like 2 words, like essential character. That's quite good. But then there's also a feeling to this word, nyingpo, a resonance in the language, which the third Karmapa describes in his own commentary, I think, as something you can trust, something which is authentic. You know, it's reliable, it's good, it's authentic, genuine. So all of that is in this word garba, Tathagata garba, the essence, the authentic, essential heart of the one who became that. This is a Shastra, an explanation that pulls together information from various places to help us understand that. And then, so that's the first thing a traditional explanation covers, the title. Then the next thing in a text is the homage of the composer, which they do usually to as an exercise and as a demonstration of humility. They do it to put themselves in place. You know, the Buddha said it all. Then the great masters through history made the Shastras that explain it all. So, you know, what more can I add? It's not as though I mustn't be naughty. I mustn't be naughty. But sometimes these days, and I'm sorry, but they are Tibetans and they are Rinpoches, when you read their teachings, it looks like they got it even better than the Buddha. They look like they're wiser from the Buddha. They're so good with language and ideas, and they're sometimes quite sort of charismatic or hypnotic. And it's like kind of, yeah, Buddha did all of that, but this is the real, you know, this is what it's really all about. They exist one way or another. So the traditional exercise of like the third Karmapa was to start with a homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and to set an example for us to rely on authentic, traditional, properly received teachings rather than to make up and spurt out our own ideas. It is a very wonderful thing. So here the homage can vary. The Tibetan authors didn't have much choice. One of the kings made a law that if you write a text that's worthy of being written and read, then you're going to start with the homage, because everyone does. But the homage you have to write depends on what the text is about. So you can't just say, as some in later centuries lawbreakers did, you know, if you have a particular devotion to Tara, then you start by saying homage to Tara. No, you can't do that. In the early years of writing, if your text was about one of the three Abhidharma baskets, about the three baskets, if it was about Abhidharma, you had to write homage to Manjusri. And then if it's about the sutras, sutra basket, you have to write homage to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, which we do here. Sutra teachings are mainly about what we need to know in order to meditate well. So the text says homage. I pay homage. I prostrate to the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas, all of them. I prostrate to all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Now, from there, having done the title and the homage, then we go into the text itself, and this is very nicely, how can you say, structured in Jamgon Kongtrul's commentary in what I sent to you. Let me just find it. I hope I have it on screen. Yeah. Then I've put in some of the structure but not all of it, because it just gets too detailed. So we've done the title, we've done the homage part 2. Part 3 is a brief introduction through scripture. And it's an introduction to the subject matter. Yeah, and then usually whatever's been done in a brief introduction is then unpacked in the body, the main body of the text, in the detailed explanation. So the brief introduction comes from 2 scriptural sources. One of them is from the sutras, and one of them is from the texts of the tantras. The one from the sutras is quite interesting because it's from the Abhidharma Sutra. Abhidharma, we've heard that. Sutra, we've heard that. So it sounds like it. Yeah, there must have been an Abhidharma Sutra. Well, there must have been, except there's no version of it left. It's a sutra that quite a lot of first Indian and then Tibetan masters quoted from, so it must have been around. But somehow, over the centuries, the original has been lost. You can't find it in Chinese, you can't find it in Sanskrit, you can't find it in Tibetan. What you find in quite a few texts are quotes from the Abhidharma Sutra. Well, it's quite interesting. We've got a quote from a sutra that we actually don't have, but we have this quotation, and it was obviously one of the sutras that talks about the Buddha nature teachings. If you remember, the title of this text is Tathagata Garbha, Shastra explaining the essence of the Tathagata Garbha. So there is a Tathagata Garbha Sutra that still exists, which is quite akin to this Abhidharma Sutra that's being quoted. But anyway, we have a quote from that, and then we have a quote from the Hevajra Tantra. Yeah. How's it doing? How are we going? Is it all right? It's quite academic so far. But it's what I have to say, just to honor the tradition and to give it to you how it was explained to me. So then the next quote is from Hevajra Tantra. Hevajra Tantra is very, very important in the Kagyu tradition. When we look at the different Tibetan traditions, then of course they all use different texts, many, many different texts, but they have key texts. Our Kagyu tradition has 3 key texts. And I remember the previous wonderful Kalu Rinpoche, when he was talking with Akon Rinpoche, when we were discussing together what needs to be translated for Westerners, what are the priorities amongst all the hundreds and hundreds of Tibetan texts. And Kalu Rinpoche said, there are 3 texts. He says, even if you're going to spend the rest of your life in a cave, meditating using the traditional Kagyu methods, those 3 texts you need to know. Even if there's nothing else, without them, you can get the actual practice wrong. You practice day and night. Just practice. Wonderful practice conditions. Being in a cave on your own with poor food and fleas and all the rest of it. Wonderful practice conditions for many reasons. But even if you're going to practice so diligently and do all the yogic exercise and everything, if you don't have the knowledge of those 3 texts, you can go very wrong. So he said those 3. And then that's why a lot of my life's work, Katya's life's work, was translating 2 of those 3 texts. Gampopa's Ornament of Precious Liberation, and then the Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra on Buddha nature. That you need those two. And then the third one, a Vajratantra commentary. Now it has been translated from Sanskrit into English a bit. It was going to be part of my life's work, but as the retreats evolved in the West, and the Karmapa at first, and then afterwards Kala Rinpoche, and then after that Trungpa Rinpoche, and the great masters Taisitupa Gyaltsab Rinpoche, as they saw how to put it properly, where Westerners were ending up after one retreat, or those who did 2 retreats or 3 retreats. A general thing is, first I thought, do I need to get this translated for the people coming out of our first retreat? They went in 1984, came out 1987. Are they going to need this text? Reports from inside the retreat master, no, not yet. Not ready for it. And then some had done 2 retreats in a row. Do we need to get this done? No, they're not ready for this yet. And then we had some who'd done 3 retreats, Lama Zangmo, Donna, and so on. And the idea at first, sorry, this is a bit of a distraction, but I think it's probably quite interesting as well, is in Samaling, our retreaters would do 4 years study, 3 years retreat, and then another couple of years study based on the Hevajra Tantra, which is all about how you live your life once you've awakened your channels, chakras and energies and all that kind of thing. So that couldn't work. They weren't ready for it after the first retreat, nor the second. And in the end, the idea is it's not for this time in the West, for all sorts of reasons. But anyway, the Hevajra Tantra commentary is the third main yogic, tantric teaching. And I really can't say anything more about it than that, except to say, because here the third Karmapa is quoting from it. Because the whole of Tantra, at least the highest yogic tantras, and especially Hevajra Tantra, is absolutely premised upon the idea of Buddha nature. No Buddha nature, no Tantra. If we don't have this clear light nature of mind, then teachings about how that can manifest in peaceful, wrathful ways and so on won't work. So it's fundamental not just to know that it's because of the true nature of mind that all the various Buddhas and Yidams can manifest, but to working backwards to know that all of those Buddhas and Yidams, they're not gods in the sky, they're not beings with their own lives. Kala Rinpoche used to say, have you never thought about it? If Chenrezig was somebody sitting up there hundreds of years, never gets up for a stretch, never goes for a jog, just has to sit there holding a jewel. What a life. Do you want to become a 10th level bodhisattva? He says, these aren't beings. It's not like an idea of gods. These are flashes of a jewel. That one jewel is our pure mind. It can manifest anything. I mean, you see this when you work with a very, very great teacher. From one second to the next, they can be peaceful, wrathful, give to each person exactly what they need at that time, perfectly. But it's not that what they gave in that moment then becomes fixed in stone. They need that absolute, total transparency, fluidity to be able to do that. for each person appropriately. So anyway, the Hevajra Tantra is premised on Buddha nature. So we start with these two quotes. First one from the Abhidharma Sutra. Although beginningless, samsara has an end. Now, if you've got the text in front of you, you'll see some of the words here are in red. They've been added to help make the meaning a little bit clearer. So the actual text says, although beginningless, there's an end. Naturally pure, that which has permanent character is not seen because it is obscured by the beginningless shell of impurities. As, for example, a piece of gold covered by dirt. The Buddha essence, or the essence which is of beginningless time, is the basis of all phenomena. And since it is present, all the different beings appear, as does nirvana. So that's the Abhidharma quote. If you look just below, you'll see that in the next section, the detailed explanation, a lot of it explains that quote. And then from the Hevajra Tantra, beings are Buddhahood itself. However, this is obscured by incidental impurities. When these are dispelled, Buddha. Thus it's said in the Hevajra Tantra. So we have two quotes to show that Buddha nature is very relevant in the Sutra traditions and the Tantra traditions. It's not just in the Tantras. It's not just in the Sutras. It pervades all of them. And then, even though we're going to go to the Abhidharma Sutra probably next week, I imagine, expanded explanation in Karmapa's own verses, there's something in here I need to give you to think about. And so it says, although beginningless, there's an end. Well, you can read the words. Yeah, although beginningless, there's an end. Think about it. Think about it some more, because something that no beginning, but it has an end. How does that work? What does it mean? And you'll see it many times. Beginningless samsara. I'm sure you've seen the words, but now's the time we have to really think about them and make some sense of them. So, beginningless time. Let's explore. Beginningless could mean, and very often does mean, you cannot establish a beginning. You know, like in physics, Big Bang. Okay, maybe the Big Bangers aren't so happy these days because we've got multiverse ideas and not just Big Bang. But, when we had Big Bang, and first there was nothing, and then it exploded. What exploded? What went bang? Anyway, I'll leave you with the physicists to sort that one out. But first there was nothing, then it went bang. And then, then that gave rise to this universe, bit by bit. The bang became stuff after a while, and the stuff became the stuff we're witnessing just now, including ourselves with eyebrows. There's the idea of beginning. In religions, there's the idea of a beginning. The Judeo-Christian origination stories that went way back to Babylon and all the rest, the various. And while there's 2 books of Genesis rather than 1, that's a bit strange too, isn't it? But never mind. These old legends of a beginning. So in the Buddha's teaching, there is no doctrine of a beginning. No beginning, no fall, as in the Christian sense. There just isn't. There isn't. There's one, I can't really call it part of the Buddha's teaching, but part of what we learn is in all the Buddha's teachings, there are this, and then in Tibetan it's called kanamatoa. Kanamatoa means the questions the Buddha refused to answer. Depending whether you go into like the Theravada Sutras version of it or the Mahayana version, there can be, what is it, 12, 14, 16 or 20 questions that the Buddha refused to answer. And so we need to go more into it to understand why he wouldn't answer. It's not because he didn't know the answer. It's because, he couldn't say because there is no answer. But also, it's a bit like these days with the media, with all their microphones around somebody who are just waiting for a quote that they can take out of context and put on a newspaper headline, or I've seen when media come to something, they film for hours, then they cut out the bits they want to make an interesting program, and sometimes it's just so anyway, around the Buddha, there were people who really wanted him to say yes or no, because they had their own ideas about beginnings. And when somebody becomes Buddha, what's left, what's there, what isn't left, and so on. And he systematically refused to answer because he didn't want the answer to be used to be manipulated, but also because in our own linear consciousness, there is not an answer that works. The answer, if there is an answer, only comes in the depth of meditation experience with a mind which is greatly liberated, multidimensional, able, like a quantum computer, to take in so much all at the same time and process. Then there's sense, much sense. But in terms of somebody with a linear mind that can only think one thought after another, an answer? No. So there are the kanamatoa. Usually in Mahayana we say 14 questions the Buddha refused to answer. And so he wouldn't say there was a beginning. And then if we look at it another way, in that simple idea, which came first, the chicken or the egg? And for there to have been an egg, there must have been a chicken. But then if there was a chicken, must have been an egg. That kind of one leads to one doesn't work because of interdependence. And like me, I'm the result of, I don't know how many tens of thousands of meals that I've eaten. And all the information that's come in and the weather I've experienced, and so many causes and conditions need to be there for there to be one moment of manifestation. Each of those causes and conditions had its own causes and conditions. So you can't work back a chicken, egg, chicken, egg, chicken, egg. You go from the egg to the chicken and everything that made that chicken a chicken, and then where did the food come from? Where did the sunlight come from? And all of that. It's endless. There is nowhere you can find the one beginning for everything. So there are those meanings for beginningless, which are very valid. It is not what we mean here. Those other meanings are very relevant in, like, when we look at karma, cause and effect, and say, people say, but, how did it start? How did my story start? My story is different from yours. It looks like I'm going to have to, I'll be a singular story all the way until I'm a 10th level bodhisattva. There will still be a singular story. And it looks like in the past, I've really, sometimes it's been great, sometimes messed up in past lives. Where did it start? What did I do to trigger all of this and make it happen? So in terms of understanding karma, we cannot pinpoint a beginning. So those kind of teachings. But here, it means no time. Not something which is the continuation of the previous second, the previous day. There is no time dimension. It's something that is, but it never came into being. Like everything we see, causes and conditions come together to make something happen. Things come into being. They endure, then they disintegrate. Situations, things, our lives, our meetings with each other, everything, causes and conditions. Something arises, it lasts, dissipates. Taisutapa often says, there's nothing that just happens. If things could just happen, in 1 second, Ken here in front of you could become a stalk of broccoli. It's not going to happen. Broccoli has its own causes. I've got my mum and dad and my teachers. I've got my causes. Everything happens through causes and conditions in our relative experience. Things arise, they come into being. Here, with Buddha nature, we are not in a timeline. We are not in any sort of time at all. We are dealing with an isness. If we look at it with human eyes, we might call it eternal, because we have words and ideas like eternal, as opposed to very transient, comes and goes in a few seconds, from our point of view. But when we go into the depths of the Buddha nature teachings, eternal doesn't work either. It just is without any sort of time. So we need to know this. I'm looking at the clock. I'm going to get to the end of this idea somehow. To understand beginningless. Never came into being, never started and has continued like this. We need to understand that. And then, briefly, we need to understand the 3 sorts of time that are in the Buddha's teaching. There's linear time, karmic time, timeless time. Linear time is what we are mainly used to, past, present, future. It's what happens if you've got a watch. Something's going round and one thing happens after another. There was a past, there will be a future. So that kind of linear time is usually called the 3 times in the sense of past, present, future. Very relevant to our relative reality. We have a history. We have a future. So there's that kind of time. A lot of the Buddha's teachings are phrased in that kind of a time. He says in a past life, I was this, you Shariputra were that. There were stories. Linear time. Then we've got second, karmic time, which is not linear in that sense. We've got three sorts of karmic time. The past is where the causes have happened and all of their consequences have played out. Story finished. All over. The causes, their results, all over. That is past. The present is where the causes have happened and the results are not yet finished or haven't even yet manifested. This is your life. This is my life. The causes for this life have been made, and we are experiencing the consequences. And tomorrow and next year and next lives, we've got more of those already programmed consequences to experience. The causes have been created. All sorts of causes from past lives, so many situations, and the results are overlapping. So we have mixed fortunes of so many sorts. We are not just either okay, not okay, lucky, unlucky, wealthy, poor, sick, healthy. It's a whole complex story. And then our relationships with each other, with the country we live in, with our parents and so on. Overlapping, multi-layered karmas. The causes have been made and the results are either playing out now or they're lurking there in your stream of consciousness waiting to manifest tomorrow or next year. That's called the present. And it's what you can feel. It's an amazing thing. I'm thinking of it sensorially. It's almost like you can smell it, you can lick it, you can touch it, you can feel it. That's your present reality. Karmic present time. So that could last. If you've got some karmas, like they say the longest one is your bodhicitta commitment. From the time you take it to the time you're enlightened, you are living that one sort of consequence of that initial wonderful inspiration. The future is where the causes haven't yet been made, and of course the results have not yet manifested. So we are creating our future karma today and tomorrow. That's the karmic time, future. So linear time, karmic time, timeless time is what we're talking about in these teachings, where there is no time, but there is every time. All of the past is there, all the future is there, in the Buddha's omniscience. Now, of course, we can project some idea of this with our human equipment, based on your mental library of past experience and what you've learned. We can project some kind of image of a one time in which all time is present. Fair enough, that's what we can do. But where we're going with our Mahamudra practice or Dzogchen is to an increased immersion where the timeless time, of course, runs parallel to our own perception of time, the here and now in our karma story, karmic time, which has past moments, future moments. So at first mind, before this meditation practice, we are locked up in karma time and linear time. But through meditation, stilling the mind, awakening the mind, then we can start to get some breath of timeless time. And timeless time will become more and more where our mind is. So because of this path of meditation, the confusion that led to our samsara and our suffering, and our mind being in a limited prison, and so on, it has an end. That is for sure. And Buddha affirmed that there is an end to samsara, to each person's samsara. We can't say it began then, there, but the confusion definitely ends. So we'll carry on with this next time, because the verses after these initial quotations unpack that verse about beginningless, but it has an end. So that will be very, very interesting. But between now and next week, then please do think about this beginningless. It's very, very, very linked in with the idea of being in the present. And those of you who've done that, you have this wonderful experience, is that when we're alive, mindful in the present, it's all there is. That basic experience can get better and better, and bigger and better. But this beginningless is very much connected to the living now, and in the end, the totally awakened now. So thank you very much. Let's dedicate whatever was good and useful, and dedicate in appreciation to the third Karmapa for his blessing, I think. Through connection with this text, then I hope you will feel the blessing of one of this most wonderful of all the wonderful Karmapas. He gave us so much. I've worked with some of his teachings on astrology, on medicine, and profound inner principles. Such a gift to the world, and such a mind. So, sunam diye tamche zikpa ne tokne ne pedranam pamche ne je ganachi palab trukpa ye sipe sole drowa rasho janchob semcho rinpoche ma jepanam jejochik jepa nyampa me padang kongne kongdo garwara sho Gewa di nyutuda Jaja Chenpo Drupjone Drowa Chikjang Malupa De Yesala Kamparasho. Thank you. So, over to you. If you've got any comments or questions, then please, it's your time, it's your moment.
Hi, Ken. I just want to say thank you very much. It's amazing. It's going to take a while to sink in. I'm going to have to really sort of think about this I think the idea of thinking of the beginningless is, we hear the word so often, but actually thinking about it.
Yeah, you need to explore it.
It's just such a wonderful idea. So thanks for that.
Yes, thanks, Ken. I was fascinated by when you said the Buddha nature teachings are said to be a bridge between sutra and tantra, and the thread thing, because I was watching something on YouTube about cerebrospinal fluid this week, and he was speaking about where the fluid goes down the center of the spine to the bottom. There is a thread. Some people think there's a thread going right through the whole of the center. There's a very minute thread where at the second vertebra keeps going down. There's a word for it, I've forgotten it now. But it's brilliant because there's like a sort of physical basis here. That's all.
Yeah, and when we explore it more fully, then this thread that's been there all the time through everything is the only thing that's real.
Yeah.
And all the rest is, we're like the longest term sleepers that have ever been. You know, the real you is there asleep. And there's endless dreams, but in the end, there's only really been you, and the dreams have come and gone forever. So that thread, first, when we think of it as a thread, I'm saying that is because we've got all the existence and life, and then somehow we're saying there's an unchanging thread in all of that. But once we get into that thread, it's the only thing that's real. Okay.
Hi Ken, it's Steve.
Hi Steve, yeah.
I've always thought of beginningless as having no end, and that's just completely blown everything away that I thought about samsara having an end. If it's beginningless, having an end. I'm really looking forward to this next week and exploring it.
Maybe you can give the talk next week, Steve. That'd be great. No, there's a bit of play on words in this, because in some texts, but if we go to the Bible on Buddha nature, right? The Mahayana Uttara Tantra Shastra, okay, in there, then (404 verses, right? Verse 4 says, I bow down to the beginningless, centerless, and endless. Right? So Buddha nature, no beginning, no center, no end. So there, Buddha nature, no beginning, no end. Samsara, no beginning, but an end. Logically, that's hard because so much of the Buddha's teaching about causes and conditions is about things start, they endure for a while, and then because they are made from various components, causes and conditions, they have to come to an end. And all these famous teachings, all meetings end in parting, all building ends in collapse, and so on. It's a fundamental part of the Buddha's teaching about beginnings and ends, on impermanence. So this is why turning one of the Wheel of Dharma, turning two, we need to have absorbed a lot and understood a lot, so that when we come to these Buddha nature teachings, we can say, yeah, but now this, look into it. Samsara. What is samsara? We tend to think, some people think of samsara as out there. It's like, they say, I got up off my cushion, then I went out into samsara. Meaning they went out into the world of other people, or, I finished my 3-year retreat, now I'm back to samsara. So then we need to go on from that to know that samsara is not a label plastered onto people and places and situations. Samsara is a state of mind where there's confusion. And it's like a very powerful hallucination, but it's a state of mind, not a state of material being. But here what we're going to see is samsara is only applied to what's happening in this living moment. Each moment we can make samsara or not. It's not something out there. It's not something in the past. It's not something that's going on. I've got my samsara, stuck with it. It's all about this living moment, which is the only thing. And either it's samsara or it's not. As we get more stability in the practice, it's almost like a flip switch. You can make each moment samsaric or not. Click, 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 click. There's no other samsara than what we do with our mind in the living moment. So beginningless, endless, it's quite something. But I did want to read that to you, because when we talk about Buddha nature itself, then we say no beginning, no end. When it says there is no beginning, but there is an end, we're talking about our confusion or samsara.
Hi, Ken. This is Vicky.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi. I had 2 questions. I appreciate they might be big questions, so feel free just to choose one if they are too big. Last time we met about the 3 turnings, you said that you didn't have time to go into why the 4 truths of the Noble One and the Eightfold Path is not made explicit, maybe, within the Kaju school.
Mm-hmm.
Second question was about Buddha nature teachings and how this teaching that you're giving now is similar to the Maitreya text.
Yeah. So the second one first. The Karmapa's teachings are a synopsis of the Maitreya text. They're absolutely based in it. When I said there were 3 texts we get together as a bundle, these are for people mainly who are meditating, especially people going to retreat. So this is a need to know Buddha nature teaching for people intent on practice. The Sangha's text is universal, but it also serves for scholars. But this text is absolutely rooted in Maitreya's text, and it draws on all the main sections of Maitreya's text. So that's straightforward. It's not different in any way. Then this thing about the 4 truths and the Eightfold Path is it's very straightforward. It's just I don't know how to put it in sort of a few minutes. What I'd like to say is that, of course, we have the 4 noble truths, the 4 great truths, and the Eightfold Path in Mahayana teachings, in Vajrayana teachings. They're very important. But they are given in their place. in their right place. In their right place, not just according to us in Mahayana or Vajrayana, but in their right place according to the Theravada own system. So I think I've also, in a couple of the courses, given one of my favorite charts I made, the 5 stages of the path to enlightenment. It shows a little meditator at the bottom and a Buddha at the top. You go through the 5 stages. So there are 5 stages of the path. Now, this is in all the traditions, 5 stages of the path. They all say that. For each of the stages, there are sub-stages. So the first one is called the path of accumulation. It's when we do all the donkey work of a beginner. It's got 3 sub-stages. The path of integration, as we integrate non-ego voidness into our practice, has 4 sub-stages, and so on. For each sub-stage, we get a list of our key tools. So we start at the beginning with our path of accumulation. We start with mindfulness, the 4 mindfulnesses: mindfulness of body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, mindfulness of Dharma, and so on. So altogether, we get 37 key tools. 37. Appropriate to our development towards liberation. That's in all the Buddhist traditions and in the Theravada tradition. So when we work up and we get to the 3rd level, where you never come back, you get liberation that is irreversible, and so much of the causes of all your problems have been got rid of forever. It's called the stage of insight. There, what are relevant are the 4 truths. It's at that stage you become an Arya, a noble being, a saint. And so they're called the 4 truths of the noble ones. Not the 4 noble truths, but the 4 truths that are appropriate at that time. That stage is all about penetrating suffering, the causes of suffering, liberation, causes of liberation. That's where it comes. It's very profound. It's as a result of all the meditation levels accomplished, so on, in earlier stages. When that insight is consolidated, there are 16 stages of that insight in the Theravada teachings. Then, and only after that, you apply as the tools the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path relies on, number 1, right view. The right view is only acquired at that level through insight into the 4 truths. Because of the right view, there's right livelihood and all the other things. So what happened with the Theravada teachings? No evaluating commentary on that, but they took the 4 truths and the Eightfold Path and they made them user-friendly for all of us, as though the Eightfold Path of saintly beings is something we can practice from day 1. You can't. You don't have the view. You don't have the view. But they made a user-friendly version, and the same with the 4 truths. They made it a very big deal, and then that's why I think last week I mentioned this 12th century Sri Lankan king who kicked out the Mahayanists, kicked out the Vajrayanists from Sri Lanka, made everyone convert or leave the island. And then he conquered a lot of southern India, Burma, Myanmar, and southern Asia, and sent missionaries, and they established the Theravada teachings. And I think it's all a lot to do with that. So if you come across Theravada, they're wonderful teachings. And they really do a lot with the 4 truths and the Eightfold Path. But it's just to let you know that in the Tibetan tradition, these things are there, but they're there in their traditional place, even according to the Theravada teachings. So it's not as though we don't have them, but what we don't do when somebody first comes through the door is tell them Four Noble Truths, Eightfold Path, and when you invite a Theravada bhikkhu, you ask them, what would you like to talk about? Then they always say the Four Noble Truths. It's so big for them. And then they say it was, the Buddha's, and I see even Tibetans doing this, it was the Buddha's first sermon, his first teaching, which is why last week I told you he didn't give a first sermon, he didn't give a first teaching. It's when the weeks and weeks of teaching he first gave to his 5 companions, who were very advanced meditators, is summed up later on in retrospect by that turning of the Wheel of Dharma Sutra. But what he gave them, it took him weeks to communicate to some of the best meditators he'd ever known what he'd discovered, why he was suddenly so different, and they recognized he got it. What? So it's not at all a criticism of the Theravada, but it's just to try and explain that as far as we can tell, we just keep that when we look in Abhidharma at the stages of the path, then we really explore in great length the Four Truths and the Eightfold Path. But as what happens once you're at that level, and what does it mean at that level? And what happens before, so that you're prepared for those 4 profound insights into the nature of existence. I don't know if that's helpful. I hope it is.
Yes, very, very much so, Ken. Thank you.
Yeah.
I thought it was something to do with realization, but that's very interesting to hear about where it sits and why historically, to be reminded of that again, and of that particular king. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not fair, because they're, it's propaganda, it's publicity. Ever since I've known Buddha, they've always said, the Theravadas, we've got the original, the authentic one version. And people really believe it. I've seen people leave Tibetan Buddhism. They say, well, I'm going to go now because that's the original and it's the authentic one. There's just no reason, historical, doctrinal, that it should be. No reason at all. That's why we had last week, it was that thing about the difference between the single trunk and tangled bush theory. That from the very, even 1st century after the Buddha, many, tangled bush is like a bramble bush, many versions of the Buddha's teaching were already evolving. Of the ones that we would call now Shravaka or Hinayana, there were 18, only one of them survived, Theravada. They were one fixed idea within a group of similar fixed ideas in a world where there were many, many other ideas. And to say this is all the Buddha ever taught, we got the original one and we got all of it and all the rest has just been made up. It's really cheeky, but they got away with it, as far as I can see. Sorry, that's opinionated, but sometimes it gets my goat. Okay. Well,
Ken? Ken?
yes, lawyer, yes.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's very simplistic, but it makes sense to me. So I wanted to share it, like the idea of beginningless. It's beginningless because when you're looking for a beginning, you need to pinpoint that one thing that made it all happen. And it's never like that. You even said it yourself. We are all the time in the present moment, and it's a combination of so many causes and conditions. So it's never beginning. It has no beginning. It's no beginning. I don't know. That's what makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's great. There's so many ways of seeing it, and we'll be exploring as much as we can the Karmapa's words to see what we make of those. But this beginningless is something we're coming back to next week. But it's good. I mean, however we think of it is good, because it challenges this presumption that's in so many of us. We have a feeling of being part of a timeline, which on one way is true, but then quite what really happened, what's the story we're telling ourselves about what really happened, and the intangibility, the arbitrariness of all, and so on and so on. It's good that that's challenged, because otherwise we're in this part of this fixed ego of I am this, I was this is my story, this made me who I am now, and so on. It's so solid. When you look at the substance of it, it's steam, just evaporates.
Ken, I've got a quick question really that builds on I think Vicky's question. Just thinking of what you said about the kind of the stages of the path and so on. If the emphasis on starting with the Four Noble Truths and Eightfold Path and so on, which is kind of where I started out as well originally, in terms of the information that was available, if that's really better as a higher level thing, then what would you suggest as a place to start for, say if somebody was asking, well, what's this all about? What would you suggest as something that you could point somebody at the very beginning to?
In practice, precious human existence. Just to realize what a gift this life is. It's a very positive thing. And but then once somebody's thought about that, then that leads on to the other three of the four thoughts. We have an amazing opportunity every day when we wake up. It's just amazing we're alive. But then it's so impermanent. And these are very tangible realities that really, they're not different from the four truths. And then we go on to karma, cause, effect, and suffering. It's accessible and it's real. The problem with the four truths is that people don't have the insight. This is why it's up there on the higher level. If you've touched Buddha nature in shunyata, a profound experience of mind, then the trouble people make for themselves is unbearable. That's happening. But without that vision, if some Buddhist comes along and says, it's all suffering, so much suffering, they just sound like pessimists. People go out a nice spring day, they breathe the air, they listen to the birds, they come back, they have a cuddle with their loved ones and so on. And they think, grumpy old Buddhists, going around suffering. Yeah, but it doesn't last, it's impermanent and you're too attached and all of that. It's the suffering of existence only makes sense, really, when the mind is already liberated to a certain degree. Because how the unnecessary damage that people do to themselves and each other is terrible. And it's all in the pursuit of happy spring days and cuddles and all the rest of it, the impermanent things. So that's where we start. And then in terms of how is it taught, then in our Kaju tradition, we've got our Gampopa main textbook. That's really, it's where we start. And in there, it's very interesting in Gampopa's book, he doesn't kind of work up to Buddha nature, he starts with it. It's like there from the start, to let everyone know that there is something so sacred and timeless and precious within them. That's who they really are, a goodness. I think that's a wonderful place to start.
So it sounds like the four thoughts that transform the mind. I think it's often
Yes,
summarized
yes.
as is a good kind of wake up starting place to start. And
That's what they're called. They're called the four contemplations that change the mind or change the heart. So we need to do them until our mind changes.
Right. Thank you, Ken.
Okay, so thank you all very much, and see you next week, and take good care, and wish you all well. And we did the dedication already, so bye-bye.
Oh, very much.
Thank you, Ken.
Ken. Try now. Try, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.